Hello and welcome to another webinar that Copters are doing. My name is George Burne and I'm delighted to say that I am joined by Derek from Trendspek. Derek, do you want to say hello?
Hi everyone, nice to be here and good to see you again, George.
Yeah, fantastic. No, good to see you too. Today, we'll kick straight off. Thank you everyone for joining us. Today we're going to be looking at Trendspek, which is a surveying and inspection software for asset integrity and data capture. So what we're going to be looking at, we're going to do a bit of an introduction now, a bit of housekeeping. If anybody's got any questions, any comments, by all means, stick them into the chat on the right-hand side of the screen, which you'll see. And hopefully we will be able to answer them all at the end. I know we've got a bit of a Q&A section later on, which would be great to go through. Hopefully we can answer that. And if there's any more pressing questions, we can jump on a call or a virtual meeting after the webinar. But Derek, if we want to get straight into this, do you want to introduce yourself, what you do at Trendspek, and we'll go from there.
No, sounds good. Nice to meet everyone. Yeah, my name is Derek and I'm one of the co-founders here at Trendspek and currently the CEO. And we were delighted to be invited by George and the team at Copters to go through Trendspek and how we use drone technology combined with software to optimize asset performance and risk protection. So it's really about driving more data and more detail so that asset managers, asset owners, and asset operators can make more definitive decisions. So I thought today would go through, I'd like to take you just through a quick introduction of Trendspek, discuss a little bit around the digital twin space and where precision asset intelligence fits into that. I'll take you through Trendspek so you can actually see it and how it works, as well as then we can touch on a few different use cases from what we've seen in the industry. Then we can go through some of our top tips for getting the best capture and what we've seen makes either a really detailed, complete model versus where you can sometimes see incomplete models. Then happy to take any of your questions at the end. So to give you a bit of a quick overview, Trendspek was founded by three co-founders. There's three of us, myself, Mitchell and Fiona. And we actually the three of us all came from aviation background. So we actually started as airline pilots. And back in 2013, we started our first venture together, which was a drone services-based company that specialized in asset inspection. And our mission back then was all about using technology to improve the way assets were inspected. But what we learned over that time was while we were solving one challenge by reducing the need for people to climb facades, towers, tanks like that, we were introducing a new problem, which was just generating hundreds and thousands of photos, which you'd end up handing over on a USB. And ultimately, those photos went into the same PDF reports that have been used for decades. So in 2018, we did a big global market search, specifically around asset management platforms. And when it didn't exist, we decided to build it. So that's kind of how Trendspek was born. So where we kind of fit within the digital twin space, because I know the word digital twin means something different to everybody. It's either BIM modeling, can be laser scan, IoT sensors, 3D modeling. But what we call precision reality twin is what we're most known for. And that is using primarily photographs captured by the drone to create 3D models, but reality models. So we most known from the most detailed models where we take resolutions down to, a millimeter per pixel. So that's kind of where we sit, and we kind of deliver this information in an intuitive, easy to use software platform that's cloud-based, so that anyone in an organization, both internally or externally, can extract, the data from it. So what our primary focus has always been is the asset itself, which sits on top of our triangle. It's why we do it. Assets are not only revenue generating, but they contain typically the most value. So optimizing their performance is always key. And the two main factors we see a lot of people use Trendspek for is down to risk protection or asset optimization. So what we found is that a lot of people that are responsible for an asset, they're looking for more detail, greater intelligence, and better evidence to base their decisions on. And what forms those decisions is essentially the data that is captured zero touch, so typically by drone, that they have the software to digest it, share, and collaborate with it. Also use it as more of an interactive reporting tool, because if we actually look to how most will still complete a inspection, it's still typically, elevated work platforms, rope access, scaffold, which is not only dangerous, time consuming, and expensive, but it's subjective to the inspector. You're normally left with only minimal data points, or only what's actually being picked up or observed. And typically that just goes into a 2D PDF report. And a lot of the inspection reports we've audited, we've found some that have contained defect identifications where 50% of the markups have been marked up incorrectly, or some of them that have missed 3 times. Well, we've found 3 times more defects from the reality twin that weren't picked up in the actual manual inspection. So by using a digital...
So Derek, what would that mean for the end client to pick up on those?
If they're missed, or if they're marked up incorrectly. So if we take this facade, for example, we've seen where defects have been marked up on, say, drop 1, level 4. So they'll send a maintenance contractor out to fix some spalling or a loose brick. But when they actually set up abseil down to repair it, it's not there. It's level 2, drop 2, level 6. So they have to go back up. And mind you, they've only been told 1 location, so now they don't know where it is or if it even exists. So they would have to do a re-inspection to find that loose brick, because from an owner's perspective, if that brick falls, they've identified that there is a loose brick, and now there's the risk if that falls onto a pedestrian path below, injures somebody, then the amount of liability that the owner would incur it can be in the millions. Alternatively, if it's not fixed, you still run that same kind of liability. So a lot of these inspections are really based around identifiable risk. So if I quickly jump now, I thought I'd quickly just show you Transpixer, so you've got a better idea of what I've been talking about, how you can do markups, reports, inspections, and then if there's any questions along the way, just pop them in the chat and we can come back to them. So if I just swap my screen now, we should change over, and you just should see concrete freestanding reservoir. And as I said, this is all cloud-based, so there's no hardware requirements, there's no software to download. It's all securely stored in our cloud, and we have multiple servers globally, and then anyone can access if you give them permission to through just a web browser. So if we take a look at this, this was a concrete reservoir that needed remediation. Typically, they would scaffold this, do their inspection, then plan the maintenance, and then act upon it. But with this, you can actually do your inspection digitally or via desktop. So not only can you navigate around the entire asset in 3D, this is all based on photos if you ever need them. And to access the photos, it's just as easy as just clicking on the point you want to look at. You can see I've identified that area. It will show you any photo that contains that point. And if I zoom out, you'll be able to see that white marker here. That's the actual camera position there. And I'll be able to actually see what this photo is looking at. So I can turn that field of view on, and that's what the camera is actually looking at. If you are using the photo to inspect, and I want to see where, say, this particular downpipe is, I can click on it, and that will indicate on the model itself where I've clicked. So it's a way of navigating between 2D and 3D.
And you obviously mentioned it's cloud-based, and you can access it from a web browser essentially. Is it the same with sharing data? Is it as easy as that?
Exactly the same. So Trendspek runs through role-based access control. So you can give different people internally different types of roles. So say typical workflow would be a asset manager completing a drone pilot having upload permission. They would come in, just upload all of the photographs. And from there, they would give access to, say, the facilities manager or property manager. Then after that, they would identify all the defects. They might call an engineer, which can then take access, share it then to use it as a tendering tool. We've seen that happen a lot. And then they can tender out the maintenance. Somebody can plan it via desktop and not even have to attend site. So the ability to do that and reduce all of the amount of site visits is one of the big keys.
Because I'm just thinking, looking at some of the people in our who are watching this, who are maybe asset owners, it can be shared between not only just their own teams, but different departments, different elements, and it's easy as opening a link that you can email through or even WhatsApp through. Correct?
Exactly. So I'll show you just the markups. So what you can do beyond just the navigation side of it. And I think I've actually lost my screen share here. Try and set that up again. Is just through drawing tools. So if I'm looking at a particular asset and I've switched now to a telco tower, what you can do is easily take measurements. So we can make pins, we can draw lines, which will then give us distance, height change, slope, measurements like that. If we keep going around, what it will give us is things like perimeters, areas. I can create volumes. I can create antenna cards, for instance, which will then give me tilt, azimuth direction, RL heights. I can even display EME plumes if I need to show antenna strength. So these are all different bits of information you can get directly from 3D geospatial reality twins. Now, if I save these cards, what I can end up with, for instance, is a whole list of markups, whether they're defects, whether they're observations. This particular asset is different antenna types. which can all be sorted. And if I click on one, you'll see that these cards are effectively like a little filing cabinet attached to a particular point. So not only all of my information that I have, it will contain all of the different imagery. I can classify different or customize different defect drop downs like severities, or is it rust, is it cracking, anything like that. As you said, George, we can use this as essentially a messenger service between all the different stakeholders with access.
Brilliant.
Keep this as, we'll always keep an audit log. So if somebody hasn't logged in, you'll be able to go in and see what has changed and when, as well as use this as like a storage system where you might have design drawings, instruction manuals. So anything can be really stored to a particular point in space, which makes it really easy to find.
Brilliant. And obviously, I think one of the big sort of benefits, just looking at even this example, is you mentioned it's customizable. So, you know, a company might not need to present that amount of detail, or they might need to present certain elements of that detail to other departments or the asset owner, whoever it may be. That can all be edited. That can all be said. So you'll have restrictions on the viewer. So if you were to send it to a certain department, they'll only be able to see a certain element of detail, and then so forth. Is that right? Am I on the right page?
Yeah, definitely. And you can control that. And if you want to send customized reports then to particular people, you can turn on and off. So say I wanted to send a report on this mount group, I could turn all of these on and in a simple click just generate a PDF report that will give you also links from the PDF report to fly back to a particular defect on the model.
Brilliant.
And then, so the idea of Trendspek, and I guess this is how we kind of got our name as well, is taking inspections, digital inspections, and then layering next year's inspection or the inspection after that on top of each other. So what we can eventually do is start monitoring trends over time. So if I take a look at this particular asset and we take a look in our timeline feature, I can duck back to what it looks like, 2 years ago, 4 years ago, or all the way back to 2016, so 6 years ago. Or alternatively, then if we want to say, just as a rough thing, if this was a crack or spalling or corrosion spot, I can measure it back in time, and then we can then go and take a look how that's changed over time. Or alternatively, if I want to actually make a direct comparison, I'd be able to do it in a synced view to see how that particular spot has changed over time. So this is where we can start monitoring trends, and not just on asset degradation, but we see a lot of clients that actually use it as a progress monitoring tool during construction and development.
Brilliant. I think what's really noticeable as well is you've managed to pull all of those up while being based in Australia, broadcasting it to the UK on a web-based webinar program, and we've been able to see all of that information. It's when you compare it to some other inspection software, it can be quite tricky to do something like that. So when you do have the facilities and the technology which doesn't allow you to have the best processors or the best graphics cards, something like this is ideal.
And these are lessons we've learned over time. I remember one of our larger enterprise clients, they were all using company issued laptops, which at the best of them were a decade old with no graphics cards. So it had to be, and so it had to be responsive, and these were requirements that we couldn't budge on. It had to be responsive. It had to be fast on some of the worst computers you could find. It had to be intuitive and easy to use, because you can't afford, high levels of training. So Trendspek is ultimately been designed to be really intuitive, and somebody just to pick it up and know kind of intuitively how to use it, which has been a big, strong focus of ours. Because a lot of asset managers, they've only just bought their first smartphone. So if you could use Google Maps, you can use Trendspek.
Brilliant. And I think that's globally the comment about smartphones. Technology is advancing so fast, and it's we do still have to cater for maybe the previous generation of technology at the same time, and some companies do miss that. So it's really refreshing to hear that.
And if we look at the industry, I know drones have been starting to be heavily used, but still a lot of inspections are literally done with pen and paper. I've got a good one set of silos here, and to give you a little overview use case on this used to be inspected literally by pen and paper. So if I switch around to the front side, and it would take them up to 12 weeks to do. 2 engineers, they'd abseil, pen and paper, mark up cracks along the way, and that would all be then written up into a PDF report after the job was completed. But now, this can all be done digitally. Like I can see every crack down to the millimeter, and then layer that onto, the next inspection that I do. If we're looking at detail, for instance, and I zoom right in, that's modeling the thickness of paint flaking off a downpipe. So you can get so much detail from Reality Twins and do all of the markups, which no longer have to be a PDF report. They can be a full interactive experience where everybody has complete context of what they're looking at and how that relates to their asset. So I guess that's a bit of a high-level overview. A lot of the other features up the top are more asset-related. So it's sharing assets as easy as just email address, asset role. These are just some of the default roles, but you can create your own. So the organization can have 100 different roles. They could create one for contractor A and then be really targeted around what permissions they get, as down to, are they allowed to download anything? Are they allowed to chat to anybody? Are they allowed to, amend one of the markups? So you can get really granular at that level. And the same, we can have full discussions on an asset level, as well as have a full file register. So you can dump folders and files and have that all accessed on the asset. So you're not having to search through computers. And I used to be surprised about how Jim would finish up or retire, pack up his computer and leave, and take 30 years of asset history with him as he went. And that used to surprise me, but the amount of times we've seen that happen these days, it doesn't surprise me at all. So it's a way of storing all of asset information to the asset itself and being able to access that from anywhere at any time.
And how long are these assets stored for? And can you choose to have as many viewers as possible as well?
You can have as many viewers as you want. So it ranges, and there's multiple plans or software plans.
Yeah.
Where it's primarily based on how much data we're storing. So if it's a terabyte or if it's 10 terabytes, and then enterprise plans up, in excess of 100 terabytes worth of information that all can be stored in the cloud.
Fantastic. And it's stored indefinitely, so you could literally store them for the next however long you need.
Exactly.
And keep coming back to them and keep reporting on them. And if you were ever to go and inspect the same asset, you can portray it over the same asset and compare. Brilliant.
Exactly. And then, as I said, you can manage everybody. Then you can manage the different roles. You can manage all of your users and what they have access to, and you can control that all yourself. So it's Trendspek is ISO 27001 certified. So for instance, in the UK, we have UK servers. So we keep that data sovereignty where it'll never leave shore.
Right. Brilliant. Fantastic. Data security is always a hot topic at the moment. So yeah, it's good to hear that it's stored within the UK as well.
No, and rightly so. So yeah, not only ISO 27000, but we are independently audited. We go under controlled hacks or penetration tests. So we live up to all the standards. It's always our highest priority and a non-negotiable. So for people watching that do actually do the captures, kind of the workflow happens is, if we're looking at those silos that we're looking at, we've often seen them, you could capture that facade or the facade of those silos in, I think they captured that in under 4 hours. And all that happens from there is you upload just the photographs into Trendspek, into the dashboard there, and then that's processed. And for instance, those silos, that was captured on a Friday, and that was already live in their account on the Saturday morning. So unprecedented turnaround times of these assets. Then that's all accessible, reporting can happen, and then ultimately the asset manager or facilities manager can then start making decisions on what needs to happen.
And because of time zones, this always always makes me laugh. If we were to upload something in the evening, so you've just got off of site, upload it, your team are already working on it within the next couple of hours, just purely because a lot of your team are based in Australia. So by the time you actually wake up the next morning in the UK to potentially have your meeting, it's already processed, it's already annotated. Already there for you to annotate and go from.
Exactly. So we run multiple processing pipelines. So unless a lot of it is automated, so if you get a really good capture, and that is an automated process, we've had data sets returned in under an hour.
Wow.
It's only if our data team actually needs to do some manual intervention to reconstruct the model, that it may take 24 hours.
Brilliant.
So yeah, I think we talked a lot about, or talked through a fair few use cases during that demonstration, but I guess primarily what we've seen from the industry is some of the most common ones are doing the visual condition assessments and doing those via desktop and doing those remotely. Another big use case we've seen is once it's been marked up, that assets owners have been able to use it as a tendering tool. So give 3 different companies access to it, and it will only be view access, so they can't see anybody else naturally. And that enables them to get a good 3D look as if they were on site themselves, and then start planning. Like, I can take my measurements. If it's roof sheeting, I can measure how much roof sheeting I need. I can work out how many staff I need on site to actually complete the job, how I gain access. So what we've found is the quotes coming back to an asset owner have been far more competitive because they've been able to fully identify, plan and scope a job instead of having these big high contingency costs, because A, I'm not allowed to go on the roof, or B, what's this one here? This LNG tank, like I'm not allowed on site. I'm not going to be able to climb that facade just to do a quote. Or if I am, I'm charging, £5,000 to £10,000 just to do the quote. We had one client who previously, just to get a quote on a tank, just to have it painted, was nearly £5,000. So that cost is now eliminated because that can all be done via desktop. A lot around CapEx planning, because ultimately it was once a book exercise, more of an accounting exercise on, okay, my industrial roof is supposed to last 10 years, so I'll plan to replace it in 10 years. But we've seen some get to 4 years and they've had, partial collapses. We've seen others who are really proactive in their maintenance and continually do these inspections with good upkeep and extend the life from 10 to 15 and then out to 20 years. So, that's back to that triangle, I guess I was showing before. The end of the day, inspections and maintenance are done to, extend asset life and preserve its value, optimize performance. So this is really a tool to kind of do that. While when we're comparing against old types of records, there's no way you can compare or monitor a defect when you're getting just PDF inspection reports, because as most of the owners we've worked with say that, it depends who they get on the day on what their pet focus is and what they identify. The next inspection, it's all completely different because the next inspector didn't see the same things the first one did. Where our whole point is for, good governance and better record keeping, you now have the whole asset. If it's missed in one inspection, with a reality twin, you can go back in time and identify that. And that's the same with like defect liability periods or, insurance claims, compliance, things like that. So there's some of the most common use cases I've seen, but we've seen all different types. We've seen left field ones. For instance, crash investigation by police. We've seen habitat monitoring. So for land management. So there's all different types of use cases. And I guess even from a land management or habitat protection, the same can be said, it is a high value asset that you're trying to preserve its life. So it's about identifying risks and then how we can work with that land to extend its life and not destroy it. So a lot of different use cases. I guess we touched on this, and Trendspek is designed. It's not like your typical every user pays. We're focused on the asset, so our, I guess, plans are based on data on that asset because it's designed for everybody to use. So, we talked about the property managers and maintenance contractors, but this allows even an investor or somebody on the board of an organization to get a quick overview and have a look around site if they haven't been there, especially around travel restrictions now and different construction projects. So we did a big case study with one of our clients where we mapped all of the different value-based outcomes and how many different stakeholder groups were interacting with this information. And, as you can see on the screen here, 14 different groups across that organization were leveraging it to drive 66 outcomes. And that was one stemming just from one data set or from one model here. over 50 people accessing it from that group of 14 stakeholders. So it's information that's never been available to date. One of the big things we've learned, and I know it's coming to the UK, and we've seen it in the APAC area as well as the US side of it, is now ESG is the biggest talking point and the biggest driver for a lot of these organizations. And by ESG, I mean environmental, social, and governance. So it's all about building resilience and using data to optimize that. So this is where Trendspek fits in. Carbon emission reductions. So you imagine those 50 users who would have once gone to site and all driven there, or you look at those silos with 2 different engineers back and forth driving to and from for 12 weeks. All of that's been eliminated. So you can start modeling out the amount of carbon reduction purely from going digital, as well as, the reduction of using heavy machinery, freighting EWPs around, diesel powered, not having to use those as much. We touched on a lot of the organizational excellence, so improved records for governance, risk, and compliance, but an improved cybersecurity standpoint as well. Some of the interesting ones is not only the diversity and inclusivity, but providing, when you don't have to send people up working from heights or dangerous situations, there's an instant safety case, and it's where a lot of this ESG is driven from. So being able to do it digitally, you don't have to put people climbing around roofs, you don't have to put them on rope access, going down a building facade. And we're not saying that's eliminated, but if things can be planned, you might, for instance, on those silos, you might identify 3 or 4 spots that need targeted further investigation. So we're not saying that digital is a complete replacement. We're just saying it's a supporting act where then you can be really targeted with what then gets inspected. And, diversity and inclusivity, being able to, and we've all learnt to work from home over the last couple of years, but having we know that there's a new mother who's an engineer. She's working from home doing condition assessments of offshore oil rigs, which would have never have happened previously. We have one engineer I know doing infrastructure inspections on bridges, wheelchair bound, who would never been able to climb this bridge. But so there's ESG impact across multiple different areas, even down to just planning for it. So we have clients who are looking at their sustainability targets and their ESG targets, where they're trying to install over 140 megawatts of solar across their industrial portfolio, where they're having to get roof deflection reports done just to see if it can support solar, which can be done now in a matter of hours and then delivered the next day, compared to a 10 to 14 day process where they've got surveyors on the roof doing laser scans. Don't need to do that anymore. Can identify that roof deflection, that can be then shared with an engineer who can sign it off, who can then share it with the solar contractors, who can then plan and draw out their installation on that roof. And this is all done digitally without anyone having ever been near site. So there's some of the impacts that going digital can have.
Yeah, we're starting to see it a lot in the utilities, and the oil and gas sector is going greener, at least. Yep. So definitely see a huge application for that moving forward.
Yeah, and then as I said, it's the first thing everyone talks about across this region, at least. So no doubt it'll be on your doorstep in no time. And I think it's primarily being led by us, because I know, like, superannuation funds are one of the biggest asset owners and drivers of infrastructure. We're all invested in that superannuation, which is then driving the fund to be more strong in its voice in what it actually invests in, and it's investing in sustainable projects, which means a lot of organizations who are building or maintaining these assets are having to meet that demand put on them. So when I was showing you those models, it's the same as any type of data, I guess. The better the quality the data comes in, the better model and more detail we can give back. So from the thousands and thousands of models we've seen, the top 5 tips, I think, that we can pass on for those that are capturing their own data is the most common problem we see by far is that photographs are not in focus. And I know that can be, a range of factors where a lot to do with, I think, autofocus. And if we're looking at things like those cell towers that I was showing before, it's pretty hard when it's maybe focusing in and out or behind the tower and then back on the tower, etc. So a manual focus is ideal, would be the most ideal way from what we've seen, but just checking it before uploading, because we've seen some, that would be by far, as I said, the most common problem we see. The other one is getting transition photos. And what I mean by that is, actually, if I take you back into an asset.
So this might be a good section to answer some of the questions that have come through, but I'll let you finish on the transition photos, and we'll I'll ask you a couple of questions on capture.
Okay, perfect. So when, instead of just taking photos looking directly at it and then going directly to the top and getting photos looking down, is getting a transition photo where you're going from directly looking down to like looking 30 degrees down to then looking 45 degrees and then to 90 where you're looking face on. That's probably one of the biggest ones. So I'll show you this one that has been captured. All of the, actually I'll turn off the map so you can see those in an easier way. So you can see, I guess, by transition photos, these ones. So we're not going straight from top down to side. They're kind of following it around. So that would be one. And getting good coverage, it would be the other one. Did you have some questions, George?
Yeah, so obviously this is externally, yeah, brilliant. But internally, where there's in, let's say, a GPS denied environment, have you had much experience with, say, internal photos?
We have, but the problem more is the actual capture side of it.
Yeah.
So, and what I mean by that is we only then can rely on visually modeling it. So using tie points. So there's something identifiable in every photo that we can match together to create a model. Where these provide much more detail is because we're using the GPS position of every image to cross-reference. So one of our best tips, I guess, to extend on that is using an RTK drone. So like an M300 RTK will give you really good GPS positions, which will enhance the model. Naturally, we don't have that, so it's a lot harder to do internals. But saying that, we do have a lot of internals. We have, as tighter spaces as, internal bridge spans where they've done that, on their belly on a skateboard going through capturing enough photos. So it can be done.
And then just onto another question, which you sort of started to answer there. What is the minimum requirement of a sensor or a drone solution that you would advise to pick up millimeter per pixel resolution?
Millimeter. This is, so there's a short and a long answer. The short answer is, we'd say full frame. So full frame, or if you've got the money to spend, the best we've seen is a phase 1 medium format camera, which means they're a lot more forgiving because you're picking up so much information from a distance further away. You can get away with not getting the most perfect capture. The smaller you go, if you're going Mavic or the smaller sensors, means you can still achieve the same resolution. It just means you have to fly a lot closer to the asset and take far more images, which means there's so much more to stitch together. It really depends then on how well it can be flown. Because the common misconception is, if I'm capturing, say, this at a millimeter resolution, it's the amount of pixels in this model is the same, regardless if I captured it with 100 megapixel phase 1 versus, I'm not sure what a Mavic is, 14, 12, 20 megapixel. It'll still be
megapixels.
Yeah.
Mavic 2's, I think, 20 meg.
20 meg. So it doesn't matter if you're using 100 megapixel or 20 megapixel, the output, say this reservoir, will still be the same amount of pixels in the end. It just means instead of taking 100 photos, you've had to take 1,000 photos to get the same result.
Brilliant.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Obviously, you're flying a lot closer, so your field of view's restricted. And then obviously, as you were pointing out on that last model, you've got to get different angles. It's a lot easier to do from further afield. I think, especially in the UK with different CAA laws, it's also difficult sometimes to fly as close to, especially built-up areas, as you'd like. So that's where the use in the application of, say, the phase 1 would really come into its own.
Yeah.
Good stuff. What you showing us here now, Derek?
No, I guess that actually this ties into this next part. So the GPS consistency. So if you're looking at a M300 RTK, for instance, you will get a really good GPS position pretty much each flight, which means if I can put a top down, I can't think of one off the top of my head. This one maybe. So naturally, a lot of these assets will take more than, I guess, one battery. And if I turn cameras on so you can see, turn this map off. So that's multiple batteries, and you can see the flight lines there. They're pretty consistent throughout the whole capture. But what will happen for the more consumer drone, so the non-RTK one, you might have, say you actually flew at the same height for every flight, but your recorded GPS position, especially in the Z-axis here, will show one flight in line, the next flight it'll actually think it's 50 or 60 meters higher, and the next flight will think it's below ground, which makes everything really challenging trying to line things up. So one of the recommendations, we always say is either use a RTK drone is always the best, or if you can, hot swap batteries, so you're not actually shutting down the recorded position of the drone. That kind of works best as well. Two other little top tips is really around exposure and getting that consistent, because once something turns white, we can't retrieve any of that information. So if it's blown out or the highlights are all blown out, and that's when you kind of start seeing like holes in the model, just because there's no information there to put together. So we found using like a center weighted exposure setting is kind of works best, where it's not trying to expose for the whole frame. And then the other little tip is just having the horizon out of the photo. So either looking down below the horizon or looking up above the horizon tends to work best. So not having the horizon like dead in the middle of the frame. So they're probably our top tips. And then, yeah, if there's any questions, I'm happy to take them. I know you had some there, George, or did we answer them all?
Yeah, no, brilliant. That's fantastic stuff. I think, you know, we've seen processing software in the past, and I think you offer really unique solutions. So that's brilliant. One thing that I was going to ask, and I know we've had this question so many times before, is are you restricted to visual RGB, or can you process the likes of LiDAR, NDVI, thermal? What is there restrictions, or are your team good at processing everything?
So what we have processed a fair bit is thermal imagery. Okay. Now, naturally, it's kind of hard, because especially if you're mapping, say you're doing the visual model at a really high resolution, and then you're dropping down to a thermal camera that's gone from 8,000 pixels wide to 600.
Yeah.
But we found, thermal is used a lot, especially around, we've seen it used around dams to identify cool spots or water leakage. Seen it around property to identify like heat loss or cooling loss, because that comes up really well, and then you can tie that back to the visual component. Laser scans or LiDAR, we see a little bit, but surprisingly not a lot. So
right,
what we've found is most are going to that more high resolution reality twin, because you know that in terms of accuracy, it's getting up there towards LiDAR. Where photogrammetry will never win, though, is things like overhead lines on rail corridors or power lines, looking through vegetation. Like photogrammetry will build a model at the top of a tree. It won't penetrate to show underneath that tree. But yes, so they're the two ones that we've seen besides the reality twin, LiDAR and thermal.
Actually, and yeah, we're seeing more and more sort of accessible LiDAR solutions these days. So
I think we might have lost George.
There we go. Lost me for a second. Yeah, I was saying we're seeing a lot more, not necessarily affordable, but affordable as well, LiDAR solutions. So we're seeing more LiDAR data coming through, more people using that for, as you say, dangerous terrains, foliage, penetration, that sort of stuff. So I imagine that's going to be a real good boost to sort of a company's arsenal.
Oh, definitely. And you know, we were talking about roof deflection and identifying that.
Yeah.
Where, you know, LiDAR, you can knock off a 40,000 square meter industrial roof in half hour. It's pretty good.
Absolutely. And stuff, I mean, I use the example of the hover map, the Emerson hover map, or GeoSlam for, you know, full disclosure, but going into these sort of the tunnel environments, you'd be able to process all of that data and it's just another way of storing it and sending it on to, the rest of your teams or, the end customer.
Exactly.
And
there you go.
And if somebody was able to process themselves, is Trendspek able to store that and are you able to upload full data sets?
Yeah, so we support a lot of the photogrammetry software. So if people are processing themselves, like in context capture and Metashape and Terra, we can ingest those outputs. So, and we do have a lot of clients that are just primarily using us for their inspection tool and their collaboration tool.
Brilliant, good stuff. Yeah, that would mean that anybody who had adopted Trendspek, they'd be able to upload all of their previous models to Trendspek and get that sort of biannually or whenever you are looking to inspect it, and you'd be able to go back onto those models. A really good question that's come up. Have you ever had any experience in stability, so cliff stability? I know erosion and shoreline erosion is a big thing in the UK. Have you seen anything where you've had to do cliff stability assessments, so over time? Is that something you guys have got any examples on?
Yes, let me show you.
Brilliant.
Yeah, cliff stability is a big one. So like landslides and things like that. I don't know if that's popped up now, but yeah, if you can then do this complete visual assessments all via desktop. Using those tools, as I said, like I can just get quick measurements and get point-to-point distances, slopes, height change. But yeah, slopes are a big one, and we do started to do a fair bit of habitat monitoring too.
Brilliant. And I think we've got a couple of minutes left just to close. In terms of sort of cost of the software, we won't go into too much on the values or anything like that, but it's there's a yearly subscription. And stop me if I'm wrong here, Derek. There's a yearly subscription, and then it's cost per gigapixel. Is that right? So you get processing packs, and you can.
Yeah. So that we have a software that's either annual or paid monthly, and that's based in the different tiers based on how much data's being held in the account. In terms of processing, yes, you can buy them as packs as needed. So you just buy them as you go. Because as I said, some process themselves and they just have a software account. Some want everything and they buy packs as they need them and their software account.
Brilliant. Good stuff. Good stuff. And if anybody's got any further questions on a bespoke solution to exactly what they're doing, if they've got a forecast for the year, myself and Derek are happy to have that discussion. We can put something together for them because every company is unique. It's not an off-the-shelf solution as we've seen today. There's a lot of different scenarios it can be used in. So no, I think that's really exciting, really interesting. I've certainly learned a few new points as well. So any last remarks, Derek, before we leave?
No, like if we do have the free account, so if you wanted to try it yourself, get in contact with George or myself, and that's probably a good place to start.
Fantastic. Excellent. Well, Derek, really appreciate you joining us today. Anybody who is interested, please get in touch with us. We'll send you a quick email out as well, just to say thank you for sitting in on us. But no, thank you very much and have a great day. And we'll hear from you soon.
Thanks, everyone.